Russia's further invasion of Ukraine. Before the war, Congress appropriated my office $30 million to assist Ukraine in creating a permanent interconnection with European energy grid and eventual capacity to export electricity to neighboring countries. Following Russia's attacks on Ukraine's grid, DOE began delivering some $15 million worth of critical energy infrastructure equipment starting last December, primarily from surplus supplies in the U.S. By early March, we will deliver the third tranche of this equipment. DOE is also monitoring Ukraine's nuclear power infrastructure and working closely with the International Atomic Energy Agency to ensure proper safeguards remain in place. And finally, DOE and our national labs are working to help Ukraine build a secure, resilient, independent, and adaptable energy system. We've invested $10 million in our national labs to help to plan Ukraine's future energy system post-reconstruction. It's clear to us that energy security and the energy transition are two sides of the same coin. There can be no lasting energy security without diversifying energy supply, including expanding the use of clean energy. Recognizing the danger posed by Russia's unitary position in the European energy market, the President took decisive action and directed the administration to take all available measures to work with our allies in Europe and around the world to ensure a surge of LNG and pipeline gas was available for Europe, as the chairman indicated earlier. Last year, some 2/3 of U.S. LNG shipments went to Europe, more than doubling the volumes exported to Europe in 2021. President Biden also launched the U.S.-EU Task Force on Energy Security with President von der Leyen to help the EU reduce overall demand for natural gas and to more quickly decarbonize. And just yesterday, Secretary Granholm co-chaired a meeting on the current natural gas crisis in Europe with over 40 countries through the International Energy Agency to prepare options to help ensure European and global natural gas security consistent with net zero transitions through the 2023-2024 winter. Make no mistake, next winter will almost certainly be harder, with China ramping back to pre-COVID consumption levels and no Russian gas for European storage. Over the past year, the United States has also led coordinated efforts to ensure a secure supply of oil to the global market by working with partners and allies on a coordinated release of 270 million barrels of oil from strategic reserves around the world. We have also worked to limit Russia's profits from oil sales through our efforts with G7 partners, the EU and Australia on a price cap on Russian crude oil and now on refined products. However, energy security is not only about oil and gas and is not only about Russia. Over-reliance on a single supplier, any supplier, leaves the United States and the rest of the world vulnerable to other countries. China currently produces about 75% of all lithium-ion batteries and controls most of the midstream capacity for battery supply chains as well. Congress has recognized this vulnerability and provided the tools to counter it through the historic investments in the bipartisan infrastructure law and IRA. DOE's work on diversifying energy supply, stabilizing energy markets, ensuring secure supply chains, and accelerating the energy transition benefit all our partners and allies around the globe, and will also create hundreds of thousands of good-paying, clean energy jobs here at home. With continued perseverance, we will win this energy conflict and come out more secure than before. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Dr. Light. And now, first of all, I would like to introduce some of the dignitaries we have with us. We want to thank the EU Ambassador Lamberdinis for being here with us, and also the head of global issues for the EU is Ms. Perez. I want to thank you all. We appreciate it very much. And also, again, Director, we're so happy that you made this effort and would like to hear from you now.
Thank you. Honourable Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, members of the committee, fellow speakers Anna and Andrew, thank you very much for the invitation, and to you, Mr. Chairman, for your leadership in the Senate response to the global energy crisis. Today I want to focus on three messages. First, 1 year into the Russian war on the European continent, the crisis is not over, but the European Union's response has been immediate, strong and effective. We have managed to combine energy security with the objectives of clean energy transition and climate neutrality. Within weeks of Russia's invasion into Ukraine, the European Commission proposed the Repower EU plan, which aims to reduce our dependence on Russian fossil fuels by reducing our overall consumption, by more and faster renewable energy, and by replacing Russian energy sources with supplies from reliable partners. Quickly replacing Russian natural gas was, of course, key. The transatlantic alliance has been essential in this regard, and I would like to thank you for that. Imports of US LNG almost tripled in 2022, and the United States is now the biggest LNG exporter to the European Union. The EU also lowered its consumption and increased the share of renewable energy. In just a few months, we reduced our gas demand by 20%. We filled our gas storage facilities ahead of winter from a historically low level. We upgraded our infrastructure to ensure gas from alternative sources. We created an EU energy platform that can aggregate demand and jointly purchase gas. We reduced our peak electricity demand. We accelerated permitting for renewable energy, and we have significantly increased the installed capacity of renewables. Russian natural gas supply to the European Union is now less than half of what it used to be. And we are working under the assumption, we are prepared for that scenario, that there would be zero natural gas imports from Russia next winter. My second message today is that we have supported our neighbors in Ukraine, but also in Moldova, who suffer from the war. We provided economic and technical support to Ukraine. We synchronized our electricity grid so as to make their system independent from the Russian electricity system. And we have provided both Ukraine and the Republic of Moldova candidate status to join the European Union. In total, the European Union and member states have provided more than 50 billion euros, 73 billion so far in financial, military, humanitarian and refugee assistance of support to, $73 billion of support to Ukraine. We have sent more than 5,000 generators to Ukraine, and we will continue to provide aid and assistance to the Ukrainian people. We have also demonstrated our solidarity and support for Ukraine by swiftly imposing unprecedented sanctions. We have adopted 9 sanctions packages and just yesterday proposed a 10th sanctions package. My third and final message is on our very strong transatlantic cooperation. The United States has been a reliable ally in supplying energy, particularly LNG, and in the global clean energy transition, supporting us in this crisis. We have had a close cooperation with the administration, and the fight against climate change is indeed a shared responsibility, as is the response to the energy crisis. With our European Green Deal, we have shown global climate leadership, we enshrined climate neutrality by 2050 into law, and we are transforming our energy system to achieve that objective. We in the European Union see natural gas as an important energy source for the transition. We count on further engaging with the United States, including as regards the supply of LNG, the exports of LNG, to reduce methane emissions, to spur investments into renewables and into hydrogen, to roll out heat pumps, to make sure that the transition is just and fair, working together for access to critical raw materials and reliable supply chains, while of course ensuring that global markets also in energy and related products are fair and open for both sides. In summary, the European Union has shown unity, determination in handling this crisis. We have also shown that energy security and the transition towards climate-neutral energy systems are aligned and mutually reinforcing. But above all else, peace on our continent and Ukraine's reconstruction are our highest immediate priority, and we look forward to continuing the partnership with the United States towards that. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Jørgensen. And finally, we have Dr. Mikulska from Rice. Thank you.
Chairman Manchin, Senator Barrasso, the committee, thank you very much for inviting me here to share my expertise. Russian invasion on Ukraine has brought back energy security to the energy policy in the EU, the way that probably could be only compared with the 1970s oil shocks. At that time, Western European nations decided that reliance on crude oil would be attenuated by bringing in Russian natural gas to support European energy and European industry and heating needs. Now, half a century later, the EU is facing another energy crisis that results from mismanagement of energy security, including over-reliance on Russian energy, underestimation of Russia's readiness to use gas flows for geopolitical purposes, and general lack of alternatives for immediate and seamless substitution. As a result, for almost a year now, Europe has relied on energy efficiency measures, demand curtailment, and ability to pay record prices for energy. Critical was also US support from the US oil and gas industry, which turned out record volumes, helping to sustain anti-Russian efforts around the world with flexible and commercially oriented supply, and via active energy diplomacy that US status as energy exporter has made possible. While these measures prevented a complete breakdown of Europe's energy system, they do point to the fact that Europe failed to ensure its energy security as defined by availability, accessibility, affordability, and acceptability of supply. The mismanagement of energy security dimension of energy policy has been especially stark for natural gas, where immediate and full replacement of lost Russian volumes has not been possible due to insufficient infrastructure that would allow access to global traded liquefied natural gas. Recent infrastructure additions, especially floating storage and regasification units, being installed hastily and at a great cost in Germany, Netherlands, Italy, may help, but only to an extent, given that global supply of LNG will not expand much over the next 2 to 3 years. There's also the potential for rebounding Chinese demand that could tighten the markets even further. Thus, Europe will need to continue competing for those supply with other LNG importing countries. And while wealthy European countries are likely to outbid others, as they did last year, this will impact affordability of their energy supply. Last fall, wholesale prices of natural gas in Europe peaked to $90 per million BTU, which is compared to the average of $6 to $10 from before the invasion, and about $6 in the US at the peak of gas prices last year. Similarly, prices of electricity and coal used to substitute for natural gas have risen to record highs. And even though prices abated right now, they are still at multiples of what they were before. High energy prices have dealt a blow to European industry, including most prominently chemical and fertilizer industry. The prospects of high energy prices into short to medium term also create concerns about potential deindustrialization as companies consider options to reshore to countries where costs of energy are lower and less volatile. Going forward, in the face of energy crisis, Europe accepted natural gas as well as nuclear power as decarbonizing options. This allowed for certain investments, as I've mentioned, FSRUs, as well as gas interconnections. However, many European countries see these fixes as short-term, which translates into a hesitant approach and insufficient commitment to longer-term contracts, deficiency that can impact availability, affordability, as well as nature of LNG flows in the future, as some currently planned commercially oriented projects, including those in the US, may not come to fruition without sufficient financial backing. At the same time, state-supported enterprises, including Russian entities, do not face the same constraints. As European crisis shows, responsible energy policy can and should consider all of the above options. Plans that are realistic, well-founded, and accessible will have a chance to propel actual change, rather than those that are only written out as policy goals. For the US, this means responsible development and use of all of its resources that allow the country to use its comparative advantage while ensuring well-being of its population. The abundant and diverse resources also increased US geoeconomic power, which, as we have seen over the last year, allow the country to step in and help its allies when the need arises. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now we'll start our questioning. I'll begin with Director Jørgensen. And the prices that Dr. Mikulska is absolutely accurate. It's unbelievable, the prices that Europe was paying at the peak of things, but we didn't have the production at that time. And the spot markets were just out of control. We understand all of that. We're putting about 13 billion cubic feet a day into LNG. We have 6 more terminals coming online, so we should be up to in the 20 to 25 billion a day fairly soon, I'm understanding. And with that and other opportunities, I think Qatar is bringing more gas into the market. Are you all able, and Director Jørgensen, are you all looking at your longer-term contracts? Because I know the American producers are looking for a longer-term contract with the Europeans to make sure you don't have that spike as you had. And one final thing I want you to compare, everything that we're hearing about ESG, you've been hearing about that being kind of a governance. I'm concerned if you're only looking at ESG and you're not looking at the geopolitical risk and what you all fallen into, but geopolitical risk, we never thought that Russia would do what they've done, but the havoc it's created in the economy and the suffering of the people, and also the just almost throwing caution to the wind on environmental concerns when it's survival. And could that be prevented, or should that be taken into consideration with basically countries and companies making these decisions based on only on one parameter and not on both equally? And that's a lot in one question, but do the best you can.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Senator. So, first of all, we have expanded our import capacity. I just want to mention it, that there's significant additional capacity to import LNG as a response to the crisis. So we are able to offtake any additional supplies that will come online globally. Secondly, as you have said, long-term contracts are an important feature of the global natural gas market, and in particular of the global LNG market. It is a commercial decision for companies whether they want to sign long-term contracts, and I think one consideration there is the extreme volatility and uncertainty in global markets is certainly not helpful in that regard. We see an interest in long-term contracts to provide the security of supply, the stability in markets. We see with some concern that a number of US suppliers have signed long-term contracts with Chinese buyers, and so we're following that market very closely and looking at what can we do from European level, from the European Commission and member states, to further support the development of long-term stable markets and offtake. One of the things we've done there, as I mentioned, is to establish an energy platform that will work on joint purchasing, and we're currently working both with suppliers but also with energy companies in Europe to see how do we best support developments there to get more stability into the market, and what is the role of long-term contracts in that context.
I noticed this morning's prices, you're about $17 a million BTU, and we're down about $250. But it's come down tremendously, and like I said, but it's still multiples. Where's your sweet spot? Where are you looking for as far as for your economy and also the stability for your economy?
I would not be able to put a specific price level on that, but I do think we have seen the worst in the volatility. Okay. Last year we had in Europe, our gas prices at our domestic benchmarks were around 350, and they're now down close to 50. And so in other words, we are out of that very worst volatility, extremely high prices. We've done what we can to avoid it by the demand reduction, by the investment.
Can you talk about the ESG versus basically geopolitical risk and what the geopolitical risk has cost? I'm understanding UK has kind of thrown caution to the wind completely, just trying to get through difficult times.
Yeah. So ESG remains an important factor to guide our taxonomy, is an important element to guide investors to the extent they want to have a green profile or a green portfolio, green funds, and that is useful in itself. That does not mean that investments into security of supply are not relevant. It's an important selling point as well, if you will, from a sector perspective. The way we have looked at it in terms of our public financing, our European financing, is that we will be financing more into the energy transition, but financing into security of supply has been a high priority, not least this last year, which is why we have helped fund a number of the new infrastructures that have come online.
And I think the mild winter, the European mild winter basically helped tremendously, I think, with your supply chain and also your reserves. What are you all anticipating for next? Are you preparing for next winter, next year, 2023?
Yes.
Or this year?
So this winter we were indeed helped by somewhat milder weather, but it was not that unusually mild. It was milder, and that was a good thing in the current circumstances. But we were also helped by our measures on storage filling, on demand reduction, on price stabilization mechanisms, on solidarity mechanisms. And we were helped by the very close cooperation and support by allies, and in particular the United States, supplying significant amounts of LNG to the European Union over the last year. As we go into next winter, and my co-panelist referred to the International Energy Agency ministerial yesterday, which indeed focused on energy security going into this next winter. It was an interesting discussion, and there's interesting analysis from the International Energy Agency, essentially confirming that in the scenario of things continuing where they are, we are actually ready for next winter. We have given ourselves the instruments we need. We have built the supply opportunities that we need. We've built the infrastructure that we need. So barring a very cold winter, barring shortages from suppliers, barring other accidents, exogenous factors, we would be ready for next winter, provided, of course, that we continue to reduce our demand and do the right thing across the European Union.
One final thing real quick before I turn to Senator Barrasso is when you talk about long-term contracts,
Yeah.
what time frame are you talking about? That means you're going to be needing this product and you're willing to sign a contract for, is it 5, 10, 15, 20, or longer?
So as I mentioned, we see natural gas as being part of the energy transition in the European Union. So our forecast, our analysis of how to get to climate neutrality in 2050 includes a share of natural gas in our energy system all the way between now and 2050.
2050.
The duration of long-term contracts, again, is up to the commercial actors, but there is nothing in our system that would stand in the way of that.
That's very good. Thank you very much. Now to Senator Barrasso.
Well, thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. I think your question is very insightful and informative, so thank you. I have a question for each of the three. I want to start with Dr. Mikulska. You know, many European countries have dramatically reduced their reliance on Russian natural gas. You can see where Russian natural gas supplies were up there in 2017 in terms of Europe's need. The two charts are showing it. The Russian natural gas is being replaced by liquefied natural gas, and where we are today, 2022 LNG is the top. It used to be at the bottom, now it's up at the top, and you mentioned, all of you have mentioned that. So before the war, Russia was the lead source of Europe's gas, with LNG imports from all countries limited. The second chart, 2022 LNG imports moved to the top of the list, replacing Russian gas. So my question to you is, as more of our allies in Europe and around the world look to wean themselves off of Russian gas, how important is it here in the United States that we increase U.S. LNG export capacity?
It's very important, and that's because of the type of capacity that U.S. releases. Commercially oriented, not driven by politics or policy. So while we can talk about the different ways in which markets may not be unpredictable, they still react to the demand and supply equation. And that's why Europe was able to attract so much LNG, because the prices were there and they were supporting the movement of US LNG and other LNG into Europe. I think it's interesting to see that part of that LNG that Europe receives is from Russia, though. So that's something also that needs to be considered going forward. And it's probably better to have the US commercially oriented LNG in Europe.
Well, then let me just turn then to Dr. Light regarding that answer and what you've just seen here on these charts. So we heard how important increasing U.S. LNG export capacity is for European energy security. Now, I'm aware of at least one project that right now is awaiting Department of Energy approval to build a floating LNG terminal off the coast of Mexico, which would use U.S. natural gas. Would exporting this U.S. LNG from such a facility help boost global energy security?
It would, Senator Barrasso. If you're referring to the two Sempra projects, both of them have been permitted, though, as of December.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're going to continue to make sure that permitting goes through. And
build now, right?
well, yeah. I mean, there's a number of issues and different permits
Absolutely,
for different components of it. So.
Absolutely, sir. And anything that you'd like to flag for our attention, we of course welcome it.
Great. Thanks, Mr. And now for our Director Jørgensen. So last month, the Washington Post published a front page story. I have it right here. Power Titan quietly aids Russian war effort. And the first line of the article reads, Russia's state nuclear power conglomerate is working to supply the Russian arms industry with components, technology, and raw materials for missile fuel, aiding Russia's deadly onslaught on Ukraine. Washington Post front page story. The article provides proof, and it's a long, involved article, that Russia's state-owned nuclear energy company, Rosatom, uses revenue from its nuclear sales, including uranium, to fund Putin's brutal invasion of Ukraine. The article suggests that the European Union may soon implement sanctions against Rosatom. Can you update us on the status of the European efforts to cut off Russian uranium?
Yes, thank you, Ranking Member. Indeed, first of all, the role of Russia and Rosatom in the global nuclear market, the fuels market, is indeed of concern. Within the European Union, we have 5 member states that are specifically dependent on Rosatom for the technical support for the fuel type, and that's for historic reasons that these countries have Russian-built nuclear facilities in their countries. So one priority for us is to reduce that dependence, to get out of that dependence and help those countries and those nuclear facilities step out of the dependence on Russian supplies. That's part of our Repower EU plan, and we'll continue working on that and working with international partners, because some of the alternative fuel supplies could come from American companies or European companies. So we're working on that. As Chairman Senator Manchin mentioned, there is also concern about the high dependency on uranium, and that's a global concern that we need to work together to address. As regards sanctions, our approach is the following. We seek to apply the sanctions that are most effective vis-à-vis Russia, that has the most significant impact on Russia, while of course harming ourselves as little as possible. And in the field of the nuclear sector, we see that the impact would, at this point in time, probably be limited, and it could cause a number of challenges for ourselves. We presented a 10th sanctions package yesterday. It does not cover these aspects, but of course, we will see what happens, and we'll continue developing our response.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just ask Dr. Light on following up with what we just heard there. So in 2021, Russia was our third largest supplier of uranium to the United States, about 14% of our demand. It seems every dollar we give to Russia supports Putin's war against Ukraine. Our nuclear industry is ready to transition away from Russian uranium. My home state of Wyoming, vast uranium resources. It does seem that our nuclear fuel suppliers need assurance that Russia is not going to be able to continue to flood our market with cheap uranium. Do you agree we need to ban Russian uranium to provide American nuclear fuel suppliers with some market certainty?
Yes, Senator, I completely agree. We have got to explore all tools to limit Putin's ability to continue funding his invasion of Ukraine, certainly including nuclear. I think any uranium ban must be accompanied by, obviously, strategic investments in our own supply chain, so we completely support your efforts, all the efforts here, to try to include that in previous legislation, but also in proposed legislation. We look forward to discussing that with you. We definitely believe that our current nuclear reactors need to wean themselves off of the Russian supply. Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Heinrich.
Thank you all for being here. Director General, can you talk a little bit about the role of electrification and particularly heat pumps in eliminating Europe's overdependence on Russian fossil gas?
Yes, thank you. Electrification in general and the deployment of heat pumps is an important part of becoming independent from Russian gas, Russian fossil supplies, but it's also an important part of the overall energy transition. We're going to see a significantly increased electrification of our energy systems as a necessary part of the transition. It's going to rely on renewables, but also nuclear, as just discussed, and a move away from fossil. In that context, heat pumps are a very interesting option. We use about 1/3 of our natural gas to heat homes, and if we can replace just some of that with heat pumps, we are better off. In addition to that, heat pumps are significantly more energy efficient, so it's an overall saving as well as a saving in fossil. So that is part of our Repower plan. We've got a heat pump plan to secure the fastest possible rollout of heat pumps. In some of our member states last year, and I can take one example, Poland, there was an increase of 120% in the installation of heat pumps last year. So quite an interesting example of the response to the crisis.
Director General, with regard to ESG, which our chairman brought up, do you think that governments should dictate governance priorities for private businesses, or should we generally leave that to the market and to the boards of those businesses to make those decisions?
Those decisions are business decisions, and for companies, the government role, the way we have approached it in Europe, is to set out guidance of what would we consider green investments. That's our taxonomy, but it's obviously for market operators.
Basically a standard, and leave the decisions to the businesses themselves.
Indeed, and not a binding standard,
Right.
a type of guidance.
Yeah. Dr. Light, U.S. utilities depend on imports of Russian-enriched uranium for about 20% of their needs in our fleet of commercial nuclear reactor plants. That enriched uranium, as we heard from the ranking member, comes from Rosatom, which was exposed, as he mentioned, in the press recently as providing materials and other support to Russia's war effort in Ukraine. So in addition to a potential domestic ban on imports of Russian uranium, which I think is highly appropriate, what else could the U.S. be doing internationally to ensure that other nations don't indirectly support Russia's war effort through their nuclear sectors?
Thanks for the question, Senator. So there's a number of things here. While it is true that, for example, let's take some of the legacy Soviet-built plants, right, in Eastern Europe that are dependent on a particular version of nuclear fuel, we are seeing U.S. providers, Westinghouse in particular, of moving into that market and trying to develop capacity there. And they've signed a number of MOUs, including with Ukraine, to help to displace that fuel. So that's a very good signal there. Number two, my office has been working with the State Department, with Commerce, with others, to really increase U.S. competitiveness on the market on nuclear power, and not just on the fuel side, but also on power generation itself. Very pleased to say that we just recently saw this great deal emerge between the U.S. and Poland to build their three of their first 6 civilian nuclear reactors, which is going to be a $45 billion deal, will support 130,000 American jobs. And I think third, it is that supply chain at home, but also the supply chain in other countries where we can rely on them as good partners. So diversification doesn't only mean independence, but it also means having reliable partners around the world. And through different international forums, we are trying to create the capacity there so we can stand together against
So we should
Russia.
leverage our allies to create
Absolutely.
that independence.
Yeah, I think it's a great way of putting it. We have to leverage our allies. We have to leverage our relationships. That's why our engagement in the world on energy in the midst of a struggle or even outside the current energy struggle is so important.
In June of last year, the Biden administration announced the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment with the G7. As part of that initiative, our government provided $14 million to support the first of its kind deployment of NuScale Power's small modular reactor in Romania. What role do you see SMRs playing to support our EU allies' transition away from Russian fossil gas, Russian fossil fuels broadly, and what are the hurdles to SMR deployment in Europe that we may be able to assist with?
So very quickly, this is the most exciting thing I think we have on the energy horizon right now, is the final emergence of SMRs as a real viable possibility. And I have to say, I've been absolutely impressed with the fact that the part of the world I've focused on the most with respect to who will deploy SMRs first is Eastern and Central Europe. And that was before the war started. So it's not only Romania, but it's interest in Bulgaria, it's interest in Poland, it's interest throughout the region where they have the expertise and the comfort of this kind of technology and seeing the advantages of SMRs, not only for electricity, but for district heating, for industrial decarbonization across the board. And we have many providers we've been incubating with your support for decades now, and they're ready to unleash. I think we've got to work with these countries on the regulatory side, making sure that they're ready for the import of this technology and even becoming regional hubs. And we have various programs throughout, again, many different international platforms that we've been working on with our partners at State and Commerce and others to help to create that groundwork so countries can accelerate their import of that technology as these become available. It's incredibly exciting.
Senator Hyde-Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here today. This is most helpful, and we certainly appreciate the efforts you've made to get here. And it's amazing that we are approaching the one-year anniversary of the invasion and the effects that has been. And the continued Russian hostility certainly makes it necessary for us to analyze everything we can of the critical role the United States has in a stable source of energy across the globe. But we can only do this with energy policies that allow Americans to flourish, that we can produce and not be paralyzed by policies and the agendas that harm that. And we witnessed the dangers firsthand when the Biden administration enabled Russian energy initiatives before Putin's invasion. I believe more can be done to help stabilize that, both at home and across the globe. And if we were to unleash domestic energy production, including oil and gas here in this country. Dr. Mikulska, this question is for you. In your written testimony, You discussed the 4 A's of energy security and Europe's struggle to incorporate them, as well as some countries' willingness to overlook the risk associated with Russian energy dominance and dependence, particularly when it comes to the natural gas market. And the world watched as this came to a head after Russia's illegal invasion on Ukraine, and in response, U.S. LNG exporters boosted shipments to Europe by more than 137% in the first 11 months of 2022 from that same time period previous year in 2021, and supplying more than half of Europe's imported LNG and helping the region survive a nearly 55% plunge in pipe shipments from Russia. What else besides LNG can the United States do that we can supply to help Europe grasp the 4 A's of energy security? What more can we do to accomplish that?
I think that nuclear power engagement of the U.S. in Europe is critical, and it's especially in Central Eastern Europe. The deal in Poland has been extremely important on both ends for energy security, but also for the geopolitical security and for the working together of the two nations. Some countries in Europe do not have the environment to support an efficient and effective solar or wind generation, and nuclear power helps accomplishing the goals of having domestically available supply at any given moment, while also kind of addressing the goals that EU is setting for those states. So I think the nuclear energy cooperation is very important. SMR, just as well. A lot of industry is quite interested in that. I know in Poland, in particular, industry parks and so on. So I think this is going to be critical, and having U.S. as an ally and as a partner is extremely important.
Okay, you were pretty confident and quick in that answer of nuclear energy. And how did the Biden administration's early action to restrict U.S. oil and gas production, how did that aid Russia's plan for energy dominance to flourish?
Well, I think it allowed Vladimir Putin to feel sure of that the invasion that he was planning will actually put a bigger hardship on Europe, for example. So that kind of probably emboldened President Putin in getting through with his plans. Thankfully, these plans did not realize, but this is because of the way that U.S. LNG exports were ramped up. When we look at the exports and how they ramped up towards the peak of capacity, it's been something that's exceptional, something that the U.S. industry, not only the government, U.S. industry helped Europe weather the storm, or at least until now, and hopefully going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to the witnesses for being here. Assistant Secretary Light, if I could just start with you. In the years leading up to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, almost a year old now, many European governments prioritized what they called the climate objectives. I'm not sure that their policies actually improve their environment, but that was their surmise, climate objectives over energy abundance. And in particular, they prioritized cheap energy from an authoritarian regime over energy independence. Do you think that that playbook executed by governments in Europe is something we ought to be doing in the United States?
I think that the clear lesson is that no country should be beholden to one supplier for its energy sources, or a very large proportion of its energy sources, and that energy security is built on energy diversification. I think that energy diversification is at the backbone of U.S. energy policy, and so I don't see any risk that the United States will follow suit in that respect.
Well, you say energy security is built on energy diversification. I would have thought energy security would be based on energy independence. Am I wrong about that?
I think it's independence, but I also think that it's not just one source of energy, because things can go wrong. No one should put all of their chips right on sort of one marker when it comes to energy security. So I think that to have as diverse a supply as possible, while still looking at other goals like climate goals, is a very good path forward for countries to take, and it's something that the United States wants to support other countries in helping to do.
Well, why wouldn't we put our chips on American energy? And we've got various sources of energy in this country. Why wouldn't we put our chips there?
I think we are putting our chips.
No, we're not. We're producing less oil and gas in this country than we were previously. The president, when he came to office, his first day in office, he imposed a moratorium on oil and gas leases on federal land. Since then, he has leased the fewest acres of federal land for oil and natural gas since the Truman administration. Why are we shutting down American oil and natural gas production, taking away American jobs and making ourselves more dependent on foreign sources of energy? I don't understand this policy.
Well, the U.S. will produce a record amount of both crude oil and natural gas in 2023, even higher than the spikes pre-COVID levels. And the president is actively encouraging U.S. oil producers to increase production and reinvest their profits back into production rather than buying back stocks. And I think that's the right policy to pursue.
He's doing that while he is shutting down the ability to lease federal land for oil and natural gas, the fewest acres of federal land leased since the Truman administration. He's boasted about how he hopes that he just said in the State of the Union that we may not need American oil after another 10 years. I mean, what kind of a message does that send? Is that energy security?
So any questions about leasing on federal land, I would direct to the Department of Interior, not the Department of Energy, sir.
Oh, listen, don't play that game with me. We're talking here about energy production. Oil and natural gas are energy production. And the facts of the matter are this president has reduced our ability to be energy independent. And you're sitting here telling me that that increases our energy security. It looks just the opposite to me. It seems to me that you're recommending the European playbook, which left them dependent on foreign nations, left them dependent ultimately on hostile actors, and that's what you're trying to replicate here again in the United States. I just don't understand why this course of action is being recommended, why your administration's pursuing it. I also don't understand why you would shut down pipelines that cancel thousands of good-paying American energy jobs. I mean, why is that a healthy energy policy for this country?
With all due respect, sir, I really don't see much of a comparison between where Europe was before the outbreak of the war and their energy mix and where they were getting energy from and where the United States is today.
Well, let me just ask you, on the topic of dependence on authoritarian regimes, about China. China is one of the largest processors of the materials that serve as the building blocks for many of the so-called green energy transition that the administration is pursuing. According to the IEA, China processes 40% of the world's copper, more than 30% of the nickel in the world, 60% of cobalt, 60% of lithium, and more than 80% of rare earth minerals. Now, in light of that, many commentators have suggested that the United States is even more dependent on China for key components of solar power, panels, wind turbines, and batteries than Europe was on Russia in the lead up to the invasion of Ukraine. So I say again, in light of all of that, don't you think that this administration's climate agenda is making us more dependent on China while we lessen our reliance on our own domestic energy sources?
Well, sir, as I said in my testimony before, I think you're absolutely right. China does own too much of the critical minerals supply chain from ownership of resources through processing and through the creation of modules and other sort of parts of clean energy components.
So why would you want to make us more dependent on them?
Use the tools that the Congress has given us, sir, to make sure that we diversify the supply chains, reshore as many of them, and create sound relationships with non-Chinese suppliers. That is absolutely a top priority of this administration.
For heaven's sake, here's what you've done. You came to office. You took us from being an energy independent nation to being an energy dependent nation. You have made us more dependent. Now this administration's gone begging to OPEC and dictators all around the world. You have made us less energy secure. Now you're making us energy dependent on China. You're canceling good paying American jobs. It's a disaster, and all the while increasing the cost of energy across this nation. It is an absolute disaster, and I can't imagine why, in light of what happened in Ukraine, we would want to replicate those disastrous policies here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And now we have Senator Hickenlooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for being here. It's a lively discussion. Let me start with Ms. Jørgensen. Ms. Director General, 10 years ago, it would have been impossible to imagine anyone responding to an acute energy shock, primarily by accelerating a move to renewable energy. But I think that's what we've seen over the last 12 months. We've got a map here that shows a small sampling of headlines from across Europe over the past year. Wind, solar, EV, records being set almost monthly. Permitting reforms to accelerate deployment, first-of-kind projects proving out promising clean technologies like floating offshore wind and green hydrogen. What has made modern, renewable, and other clean technologies Europe's first and best tools for heading off the acute energy crisis you're dealing with now?
Thank you, Senator. I think the first part of my response is a fact of geology and geography. We do not have the abundance of energy sources in Europe. We're net importers to a very significant extent. So in other words, becoming completely independent is not possible. We need to rely on partners like the United States for working for secure energy. But we also need to become as resilient as possible within that reality. And one of the aspects, one necessary component of that resilience and that independence is renewable energy. Solar, wind, hydro, geothermal as the most used ones, as well as biofuels and biomethane in the European Union. So the green transition is an absolute necessity for our security, for our independence, for our resilience in energy terms. Those two objectives, security of supply and the green transition, go hand in hand. The green transition is necessary for security of supply. The other aspect that I just want to flag briefly is the fact that the technology for renewable energy has developed very, very significantly over the last decades. The first offshore wind turbines that were established about 3 decades ago were essentially onshore turbines that were just put out into the water and let's see how it works. It worked, but with a fairly limited production generation. Now they are there's a significant energy coming from our renewable sources, offshore wind, but also solar, as the map shows. Thank you.
Yeah, and as you say, that it is able to allow geographies that don't have traditional access to their own energy resources to create energy resources where they didn't exist before. Dr. Mikulska, last year our LNG exports provided a vital lifeline to our European allies. We've heard a fair amount about that. While Europe's need for LNG is acute now and will remain so for the near midterm, who knows how long, what the longer term looks like is somewhat uncertain. What should the U.S. be doing now so that we can best continue to support Europe's energy security through the shipment of LNG while planning for a range of possible futures? You follow? You understand the question?
Right. So how should what the path of the U.S. should be, right? And as Director General has mentioned here, U.S. situation is quite different than European situation. So it would not be, it would be a mistake not to think all of the above, in particular what's currently available and what's currently the most reliable sources of energy supply. Renewable energy is there. It provides electricity, it provides additional sources, but it's not reliable yet. And that provides an issue for economic development. And it does create an issue of what kind of backup power do we want. So until then, we will be relying on fossil fuels that we know, and nuclear energy and geothermal if it gets developed a little bit more, or hydro. And the U.S. should look at all of the above while making sure that its resources now are well developed and make sure that we have them not only for ourselves, but also can supply our allies. And as we have seen, and by the admission of the Director General, our allies want those resources. It's just the question is, which you actually put out there, what's the length of the short term or medium term that they need it for? We don't know that.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I'm out of time, but Dr. Light, I just wanted to thank you for all your work. And I do agree that having more solutions, more energy sources, makes our country and the world more resilient, creates redundancy that's of immense value in times of hardship. So keep up the good work.
Sorry. And now we have Senator Daines.
Chairman Manchin, thank you. Over the past year, in fact, 11 months, I've traveled to Europe several times. I've visited 10 countries across the continent: Ukraine, Romania, Germany, Lithuania, Estonia, Poland, Latvia, Moldova, Slovakia, and Hungary. One lesson stood out in every single country I visited. Energy security is national security. I met with high-level leaders in government and industry. They all told me about the importance of reducing dependence on Russian energy and the critical role the United States can play. In Lithuania, I had a chance to visit their new LNG import terminal. By the way, that big ship that has the regasification process on top of it is called the Independence, for good reason. Because with this terminal, they now can turn away from Russia and begin importing LNG from the United States and other friendly nations. It's a big step for energy security of Eastern Europe. We should be applauding and promoting more projects like it. What I fear, though, is we have an administration that might say one thing occasionally in public, but they're not learning from the lessons of Europe. Europe's green delusion resulted in a near complete dependence on Russia for energy. Many countries shut down their baseload coal and nuclear plants without having a real plan. One leader in Europe, describing some of his colleagues to the north, said a vision without an action plan is a hallucination. In fact, Europe went so far as to condition Lithuania to get into the EU to decommission their nuclear plant. Lithuania used to be a net energy exporter, but because it was the green whim of the moment, when anti-nuclear for a period of time, they had to shut down their plant to get in the EU, leaving them very vulnerable, and thank God for LNG that's helping make up now for that loss of baseload power. It's truly baffling. We can't let this administration take us down the same dangerous path. I don't think this administration is learning anything from it. This religion, this pursuit of this green hallucination is a dangerous moment in U.S. history and for the world. They're talking out of two sides of their mouth. On one hand, DOE's approving more LNG terminals to supply our allies. On the other hand, FERC is slow-walking pipeline approvals that would support these export terminals. You got to have infrastructure to get the gas to the ports. We take a step forward by banning Russian oil imports, but then the Department of Interior cancels lease sales, increases fees and taxes on small producers, stalls a plan for offshore oil, enacts regulations after regulation to close on domestic production, and of course, he shuts down the Keystone Pipeline in Montana, which was, besides being 1 million barrels a day of oil, is $80 million of tax revenues every year to impoverished counties across Montana. You have the President of the United States in a State of the Union speech. He ad-libs, and he says we only need oil for the next 10 years. It was a laughable moment. But even his own Energy Information Administration, the EIS, says, quote, petroleum and natural gas remain the most consumed source of energy in the United States through 2050. That's coming right out of a subset of the DOE. Dr. Light, what's the deal? Does this administration have a real plan to stop Putin's stranglehold on Europe, cut off his war chest that's funded by energy exports, or is this administration talking out of both sides of its mouth?
Thank you very much for the question, Senator Daines. And I have to say personally, thank you very much for the travel that you've done in the region and the expressions of support of the American people to these countries who are on the front lines of everything. So we really do appreciate that. I do believe we have a plan. I think that we've seen it in action. We have seen an absolute surge in LNG exports to Europe, far more than we did in 2021. In 2022, this didn't happen by accident. It wasn't just purchasers in Europe deciding that they were going to turn to LNG out of desperation. There was a lot of concentrated efforts by this administration, including at a very critical moment when there was a price crunch and a supply crunch last year, persuading the Japanese and the Koreans to defray some of their LNG tanker shipments that they were getting there, instead to surge them to Europe where they were more needed.
Yeah.
So there is an effort here for cooperation that we are.
But I'll tell you what, and I appreciate that, and I may interrupt, is that we just put the 100th judge on the bench here of the Biden administration. So while you talked about something that says it's necessary as an important step, it's not sufficient. When these far left ideological judges are being put on the bench here that interject themselves, stopping projects in the natural resource side of the equation, they're lifetime appointments. And until we fix this problem, which is a long-term problem, permitting reform is a very good thing, but we still run a very real risk right now through activist judicial leaders here who are driving an ideological agenda here, who are anti-conventional sources of energy. I want to move on to gas stoves. Europe's begging us for American energy, and now we've got the DOE throwing out all common sense, prohibiting 96% of existing gas stoves. Just when I thought it couldn't get more ridiculous, it did. My question is, the White House recently said it does not support banning gas stoves, but the proposed rule effectively bans 96% of existing gas stoves. What's the truth?
The president does not support the banning of gas stoves.
I want to know what the
Secretary
rule
Graham
is,
does
though.
not
I understand what
support
the president says up front because he knows politically he's got an absolute firestorm on his hands because people are looking back and saying this is ridiculous.
So, sir, I would be very happy to arrange for a meeting between the staff for the
I just want to say the truth is the rule banned 96% of existing gas stoves.
Right, and that's outside the purview of my office. I'm sorry, sir, but I'm international.
You don't have an answer.
affairs.
We want to get an answer to that. Yeah.
ERE, I'm sure, would be very happy to have a meeting with your staff to talk about those questions and get to a good answer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the panel members who are here today. Assistant Secretary Light, both you and Director General Jørgensen, in your testimony discussed the need for the U.S. and European Union to work together to secure reliable access to critical mineral supply chains. And as you know, Secretary Granholm was in Northern Nevada last week to announce a $2 billion loan guarantee to help Nevada-based Redwood Materials manufacture and recycle critical components of the lithium-ion batteries. We all know these batteries are going to play a crucial role in expanding our clean energy economy. These investments are possible due in part to the creation of the battery grant program that was created here as part of the bipartisan infrastructure law, something that I absolutely supported and will continue to, and we need to continue to support the processing and refining that we have done here through the programs that we have passed. Nevada, and I can't stress this enough, is really the growing nexus for our clean energy and critical mineral future, because it is the only state in the U.S. that encompasses every facet of the critical mineral and advanced battery economy, from the mining of the critical mineral deposits to the research and development to processing and manufacturing, and finally to the recycling operations. This is a perfect example of the economy that we believe that we should be investing in. So let me ask you this, and let me start with Assistant Secretary Light. One, how is DOE utilizing these new programs that we have been talking about and authorities to address these international supply chains? And then how do you envision the collaboration that the two of you have been talking about that we need to do? So Secretary Light, let me start with you.
Thanks very much, Senator, for the question. I know the Secretary very much enjoyed her trip to Nevada. I mean, it is, as you said, just a great object lesson in how we can sort of see the future where all of it is done, in one place, from the mining to the manufacturing and refining and goes on through the entire supply chain. So using the authority and the funds provided by the bipartisan infrastructure legislation and the Inflation Reduction Act, we're doing a number of things. We have already issued a number of awards and announcements, including $74 million in funding to select advanced domestic battery recycling and reuse, $350 million for long-duration energy storage demonstration project FOA, $30 million for energy storage lab calls, $12 million for lithium extraction and conversion from geothermal. It just goes on and on and on. The people working on that in that part of the building have one of the greatest jobs because they get to be as creative as possible on this to make sure that we can, as Senator Barrasso pointed out, respond to China, which is already way out in front in a very dangerous way, in a way that is analogous to where Russia was with Europe on the gas supply. And so we've got to stop that, and we are deploying everything we can, not only to reshore, but to create those supply chains here on those credits. I'd also like to say that we're doing this globally, internationally. DOE is part of, along with the European Commission, is part of 4 platforms, separate platforms from the Mineral Security Partnership, where we're looking at how can we combine resources on acquisition of this technology to advance work through different platforms to work on recycling and all these other measures to increase diversification of supply in critical technologies. And I'm very proud to say that one of the singular achievements that Secretary Granholm achieved when she chaired the International Energy Agency Ministerial last March was to create a new voluntary stockpiling program for critical minerals in the International Energy Agency. IEA, as you know, was created to stockpile oil. Now we're going to look at stockpiling critical minerals as well in case we get these bottlenecks, whether they happen by accidents or intentionally, and have something to hedge against them.
Thank you. And Director General Jørgensen, any thoughts on the collaboration and what we should be thinking about here? Yes, I think first of all that indeed collaboration, cooperation with partners, with allies is absolutely essential for our energy security, because our energy security relies on critical raw materials, in particular raw materials for renewable energy, but also for batteries, energy storage. So essential that we work together. We've got our own program, and we'll be presenting in just a few weeks a Critical Raw Materials Act within the European Union, as well as a Net Zero Industry Act. So that is our European part of it. And linked to that, of course, is the very close international cooperation. We've got the Critical Raw Materials Alliance. We've got work in the International Energy Agency. And so we're going to continue the close cooperation and step it up. Also, I think in the context of the US-EU Energy Council meeting in just a few months from now.
Thank you. I know my time is just about up. I will submit the rest of my questions for the record. Thank you again for the panel members that are here today.
Thank you, Senator. Now we're going to go to Senator Risch because of the generosity of Senator Mikulska.
Thank you, Senator Murkowski. Well, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to come today to talk a little bit about a really significant and serious problem that the U.S. is facing, and I'm going to ask Mr. Light about it a little bit. But first of all, let me set the stage for this. The world collectively relies on Russia for the nuclear fuel supply chain, with 1/3 of conversion and half of the enrichment capacity coming out of Russia. This is for nuclear generating electric facilities. The U.S. receives about 20% of its enriched uranium from Russia, which is not currently sanctioned. We have almost no domestic uranium processing, with no operational conversion and only one active enrichment facilities. We cannot currently produce the necessary enriched uranium to supply the current nuclear fleet that we have, and for research needs, and obviously for national defense needs. Idaho, as most of you know, is the home of the Idaho National Lab, the birthplace and flagship lab for nuclear energy in America, indeed in the world, indeed in the universe. In 1951, we generated the first electricity there using nuclear energy, and since then we've been on the cutting edge of that. Right now, all of us are familiar with the fact of what Russia has done, this illegal war that it's pursuing against Ukraine, and its absolute lack of judgment in conducting its affairs in the world is really remaking the face of Europe and the face of the world when it comes to supply chains in a lot of matters. When this war is over, it won't be over. We, along with 29 other countries, formed NATO to push back against Russia, and it kind of went to sleep as we went along over the decades, everybody thinking that when the Iron Curtain came down that Russia was going to more or less behave itself and join the international players. Maybe poison a few people once in a while, that's what they do. Interfere in elections once in a while, that's what they do. But other countries do that too, and we started doing business with them, as did Europe, and Europe got tied into them even more than we did. Nobody believed that they'd start a medieval war in the 21st century, but that's where we are. When this is over, our relationship with Russia is not going to repair for a long, long time, nor is obviously Ukraine or Europe. There's not going to be a reconciliation commission where we all get together. What these people did, what the Russians have done in Ukraine is barbaric, it's unforgivable, and it's going to be decades and decades before anybody that is in the right mind does business with Russia again. So that brings me to the problem that we have, and that is that we have this supply chain with the fuel coming out of Russia. Now, the ranking member and chairman and I have produced legislation that we're going to get in and try to resolve this problem to a degree. But this is a serious problem. So, Mr. Light, for your question, since you're in charge of international affairs at the Department of Energy, what would you do tomorrow if you got to the office and somebody handed you a pink slip that said, "Oh, the Russians called and they're done. They're not giving us any more any more supply"? What plan do you have to respond to that situation?
Can I just say, sir, that the way that you put that you articulated where we are with Russia and the problems going forward, I couldn't agree more, 1,000%. I think you're absolutely right. It's astonishing what's happened, and this energy struggle will continue.
It changes the world.
It totally does, sir.
And for the
having grown up
foreseeable.
in the Cold War, I can't believe we're here again, frankly.
Here we are.
So, but I won't take up your time with that. If we had that pink slip, sir, then I hope we have your legislation in hand to already start the process to get out of that dependency. We absolutely have to make strategic investments to strengthen our domestic supply chain so that we are not in this position. We never are in that position again. Our current reactors will need some time to wean off, but if it shut off, then we've got to be there. And I think that we are going to do everything we can to make sure with the current authority that we have already in the legislation that you plan, that we are in a position where we can respond to that. Secondly, we've got to look also at the technologies of the future. The most amazing thing about Idaho today is it is these test beds on the small modular reactors, which are just so encouraging and so fantastic, and so I think where we really definitely need
Those are the future.
forward.
There's no question about it.
Those are the future, and we need to make sure that the fuel for those SMRs, again, we do not find ourselves in a position where the United States is not producing its own supply for that. So on Helio as well, we've got to move forward and move towards nuclear fuel independence.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Light. I'm sure you will agree with me, as the ranking member and chairman and I believe that this is not a partisan issue. This is an American issue, and it's an issue that is of critical importance. And more importantly than that, the issue, unfortunately, does not lend itself well to the pace at which we move around here. And this really needs to move forward. So thank you for your thoughts in that regard. I hope you'll join us in doing our best to get this legislation passed. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Light, there's some U.S. oil companies that are still operating in Russia despite pledges to wind down their operations. National Oil Well Varco, which is a U.S. company based in Houston, has oil field services in Russia, still even after announcing in a press release a year ago that it was, and this is a quote, actively examining our alternatives, including the potential to further curtail our activities. In March of last year, 2022, Schlumberger announced that it would, another quote, immediately suspend new investments in technology deployment to our Russian operations. But just 7 months later, Schlumberger, still in Russia, was caught distributing military draft notices to 9,000 of its Russian employees to supply forces to Putin's mass mobilization effort. So, Mr. Light, for some of these companies, it sounds just like business as usual in Russia. In May, I wrote a letter to Secretary Granholm and Secretary Yellen asking them to evaluate oil companies that are still operating in Russia. So could the department please take a closer look into this and provide me with a report on the operating status of U.S. oil companies still in Russia? And things specifically like this. I mean, I just find this, just very concerning that a company that is based in London, that trades on the New York Stock Exchange, that is assisting Vladimir Putin in getting his draft notices to his citizens. That's just unacceptable. So I'd appreciate you looking into this.
I'm happy to take that on, sir. And even though it is Treasury and Commerce who enforce those sanctions and compliance, I am very happy to work with you and your staff, schedule a briefing as soon as possible to talk about the Russian sanctions, their impact on the industry, and what we know and what we need to know in order to address this problem moving forward. So we'd welcome that conversation.
Yeah, I think these companies should have had plenty of time to wind down operations by now, and shouldn't be, assisting in Russia's war in Ukraine. So, Ms. Jørgensen, as you know, oil revenue is how Putin finances this illegal invasion. And in December, the West capped the price of Russian oil at $60 a barrel, well below the global market price of $85. It appears that the cap is having the intended effect of depressing revenue without directly cutting the global supply. The Kremlin's income from oil and gas is the lowest that it's been since the beginning of this pandemic. Some analysts estimate that Russia only earned $5 billion from fossil fuels in January, which is about half in January of the previous year. So on Friday, this past Friday, Russia announced it was cutting crude oil production by 500,000 barrels per day, which is about 5% of the country's output. And the propagandists there say that the cuts are retaliation for the oil price caps, but I think it's worth noting that Russia's decision came days after it endorsed the OPEC Plus plan. So, Ms. Jørgensen, how would you describe the effectiveness of these price caps, and could they eventually diminish Russia's ability to invest in future production?
Thank you, Senator. So far, as your question indicates, we have seen quite a significant effect of the price cap. I think it's important to note that the price cap comes on top of what was already a full embargo on oil and coal exports, small exception for some pipeline oil for reasons of security of supply for a couple of member states, but really 90% of our oil imports was already under a full ban. We have banned investments into the energy sector in Russia, and we have banned exports of any technology that is necessary for extraction or LNG. So the price cap comes on top when these very significant sanctions are already in place.
And are our allies complying with this, fully complying with this cap?
So far, the results are good, both in terms of reducing the profits for Russia in this sector, but also in terms of ensuring compliance. This measure put together jointly with partners, including the United States, seemed to be effective. We have, within the European Union, appointed an official to be responsible, including for relations with international partners, to ensure that there is compliance with the sanctions. So I think so far so good, but we of course continue to monitor very, very closely.
What would happen if we changed the cap to $50 or $40?
It is possible within the cap, within the measure we have taken, to reduce downwards. So we'll see over time how the markets develop and what's the most effective way of approaching it. So I think we have so far, as I said, put in place 9 sanctions packages. We've presented a 10th, and we will be ready to do what is necessary.
Yeah, I think that's worth looking into. Thank you.
Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank both you, Ranking Member Barrasso, and Chairman Manchin for convening this really timely discussion on global energy security, and thank the panelists for your contribution to this. I think it is absolutely clear the energy world has changed. It has changed in the here and now, and to the point that Senator Risch made, you know, you can't undial this. You cannot take back the atrocities that we have seen perpetrated on the innocent people of Ukraine. You can't just say that once this war is ended, we're back to normal. There is no new normal. Well, there will be a new normal, but the normal will not be what we know today. So when we think about the disruption of a global pandemic and what that meant to energy supply and security, and then you overlay the war in Ukraine brought about by Russia, it is transformational in a way that I'm not sure that any one of you, as expertise as that you bring to the table, really can anticipate how we build this out in a way that is capable of really recognizing the change dynamic. And so you kind of look back when you're trying to figure out how you move forward. There is a little bit of a parallel historically when you think about the oil crisis of the 70s. And here in this country, we woke up and said, well, we have an opportunity to weigh in and make a difference here. We can produce more supply, and it was that very transformational decision in the mid-70s that allowed Alaska to help lead the country with building our oil pipeline from the north. It really helped to make a difference not only for the United States but for our allies. It's been noted that Russia has just made this announcement that they are cutting production another 500,000 barrels a day. We have an opportunity in Alaska as we speak. The administration has just a matter of weeks to determine whether they're going to announce a final record of decision on a project up north, the Willow project, that would provide for 180,000 barrels a day. That's real production. That's real production in the here and now. And yet there is some concern by the administration that perhaps the recommendation from their own agency might take them in a different direction, might take them in a direction where they either do not approve the Willow project, or worse, it's kind of a sleight of hand and they approve it knowing that what they have changed results in an economically unviable project. That would be a travesty not only to Alaska, but to the country. And I think our allies who are wondering, we've got issues here that we're facing. Director General, you have noted the efforts that the European Union has taken to work through some very scary winter months, and looking at next year, you think you can make it again, but our reality is that when we move to address the supply makes a difference. And so I haven't asked a question here, but I want to just make clear my message to you, Dr. Light. You may say that this is a decision within the Department of Interior and your energy, but you're also part of the administration, and I would kindly ask you to take back to the White House the imperative of what it can mean to bring on meaningful production in this country in an area where we are poised to refill that pipeline that we built in the mid-'70s. I want to direct a question to you, Director General. I spent a lot of time with our Arctic partners. I was in Norway just recently, and they shared with me how they had really ramped up their production of natural gas to help offset Europe at this time of real crisis with supply. And it has been remarkable what they have been able to do just as one producing nation there. And when I asked them, well, how sustainable is this? If this continues, and again, we've got a new energy world in front of us, can you continue to meet that demand? And it's not unlike what we face here. It's about the capacity. How do you move it through existing pipe? So my question to you is, have these discussions continued at a level where you are looking to the longer-term solutions of additional supply within Europe that can help move the European Union forward?
Thank you, Senator. And indeed, we have had as an immediate focus to get through that first winter of crisis, that first year of the war, to make sure we got that securely. And I've outlined the mechanisms, the instruments we've given ourselves. The next focus was then in the coming years, the coming winter. How do we fill our storage for the coming winter? How do we put more renewables online, more alternative energy sources online? And how do we reduce our consumption so that we can help contribute also to stabilizing global markets? And the focus then is on the years after that. As I've said, the next winter looks encouraging. We have done what we can. We still have to be careful. There's no room for complacency, but we are prepared. If we look between now and 2030, we can see that global energy markets and the natural gas markets will remain tight. There will be some supply-demand gap, and so we need to respond to that together. Our planning in terms of how the energy system stays both secure, affordable, and sustainable goes to 2050 with the Green Deal plan for the changes in the system. And that includes all the different relevant energy sources. We have mentioned natural gas as part of that transition that will stay with us over the coming decades, significantly increased levels of renewables, continued nuclear as part of the European energy system, and a continued effort and investment into energy efficiency to lower consumption. So that long-term planning is very much part of what we do and part of what we do together with our member states. Each member state is responsible for its own energy mix And each member state draws up a national energy and climate plan for how to achieve the targets for 2030 and beyond. So there's a close coordination as part of that. You mentioned Norway. We have seen significantly increased supplies from Norway, primarily of pipeline gas. We had, in the second half of last year, the very important opening of the Baltic pipe that transports natural gas from Norway to Poland. So that has been a very important contribution to making that part of Europe energy secure.
But we also recognize the vulnerability of those pipelines as well, something that the ranking member has focused on as well. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm well out of time.
Thank you. Senator Cantwell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank the chairman of the committee and Senator Mikulska for leading the charge last year in banning Russian energy imports, and commend the administration for putting a price cap on Russian oil to help cripple Russia's key revenue efforts in funding its war. I think the vast majority of Congress and the American public agreed that we needed to continue to punish Putin and his cronies for the outrageous assault on Ukraine. I think what we also need to think about is how we continue to learn lessons here and move forward to make sure that our economy is not as vulnerable to the continued role and pain from various markets, and to continue to make investments that are going to help us diversify off of the sources of energy that we are on today. I do want to focus on an aspect of this hearing, though, and that is the vulnerability of our nation to cyber attack, our pipeline to foreign agents. The weapon here is not withholding oil or natural gas supplies, but rather disrupting them. I see a nod already from the Director General. The Colonial Pipeline System cyber attack 2 years ago was a wake-up call, exposing the threat facing our nation's pipeline infrastructure. And it was not just pipelines. According to CEO who testified before this committee on cybersecurity threats last year, Russian hackers got dangerously close to knocking out a big chunk of the American grid. And the Russian malware they used is still out there. So after Colonial Pipeline, as well as the Texas Big Freeze event, it became clear that we can't ensure the reliability of the bulk power system without ensuring the reliability of the natural gas pipeline. And the two are linked, our bulk electricity system and our energy pipeline system. So this committee, thanks to the leadership of Senator Manchin and Murkowski, recently directed FERC to establish incentives for cybersecurity technology investment in the bipartisan infrastructure bill. But I believe more needs to be done. Then FERC Chair Chatterjee and Commissioner Glick called for a 2018 mandatory cybersecurity standard for pipelines, and with the help of the North America Electric Reliability Corporation, NERC, and FERC, they have approved and enforced vital mandatory cybersecurity standards for the electricity system. These standards work and have been around for over a decade. But as I understand it, that there are no comparable mandatory comprehensive standards for nearly 3 million miles of natural gas, oil, and hazardous liquid pipelines across the United States. That's why I plan to introduce legislation that FERC has a clear role in protecting our pipelines for cybersecurity attack. So, Mr. Light, do you believe that cybersecurity threats to the natural gas pipeline, including those by foreign state actors like Russia, represent a serious threat to our national security?
I do, Senator.
Okay, thank you. Well, we'll look forward to working with the administration then on trying to get that done.
Absolutely, Senator. And can I say,
Yes.
Can I add one quick thing? Just
Yes.
that it's not, I think we have been also working out of my office, in particular on strengthening cybersecurity also with our partners in Eastern and Central Europe. We started with Ukraine. Some of the $30 million appropriation that my office got before the war started was focused on trying to clean out the Ukrainian energy system so that it could prepare for integration with the European energy system. We have our signature partnership with Eastern and Central Europe is called the Partnership for Transatlantic Energy and Climate Cooperation. Our ministerial with 24 countries and Secretary Granholm will be in Zagreb on March 1st and 2nd. We have a working group on cybersecurity that I co-chair with Lithuania and several members there, so we can use the abilities that we have at Idaho National Lab, at PNNL as well, to train a number of governments in the region also to know how to hunt out, find, and secure themselves against cyber attacks from actors like Russia.
Thank you, Dr. Light. Appreciate that.
Senator Lee.
Thank you.
Director General Jørgensen, I'd like to start with you, if that's all right. In your opening statement, your written statement submitted to the committee, you have indicated that you have, in your words, doubled down on a clean energy transition, and that recent events have quote, proved that European institutions and democracy are robust and prepared for the challenge, close quote. Recent events, however, tell a little bit different story, a slightly different story than that. Russia extorted the EU by throttling gas flows into the continent, and member countries started the winter with severely depleted natural gas stores. EU energy prices doubled in many member states, and mercifully, the EU was bailed out of a dire situation when 56 billion cubic meters of U.S. natural gas came through, along with an unusually mild winter. We saw Green New Deal member states cutting down old growth forests and starting coal-fired power plants just to keep warm. These are not necessarily signs of things going well. So what can you tell me about what steps the EU is taking to ensure that we've got proven, dispatchable energy sources that will be available in the future when these interruptions occur? Because, as I'm sure you would agree, burning wood is one of the dirtier things that people can burn.
Indeed, thank you, Senator, for the question. I think there is a history until the 24th of February 2022 and the history after that. Before February 2022, before the 24th of February, we were highly dependent on Russian fossil fuels as part of our energy mix. As I mentioned earlier, we are net importers. We don't have significant domestic extraction of energy, and so the most domestic source we have is renewable energy, and we have invested in that to build that out as part of our energy system.
Is sawdust considered part of that? Sawdust, wood chips? I'm told that by some definitions, those are considered renewable when they burn the pelletized sawdust.
Part of our renewable mix is what we call biofuels, and we have sustainability criteria to make sure that there is not a negative impact overall on the environment and climate in using biofuels as part of the energy mix. From the 24th of February 2022, very shortly after that, we decided to reduce that dependence on Russia. We decided that that was not an acceptable situation. This was decided unanimously by all European heads of state and government. And what you've seen since the 24th of February last year is a significant reduction, more than a significant reduction, a cut in that dependence on Russia. We got through that year without any shortages. We got through that year with secure supplies. We got through that year, as you said, with very high energy prices as a result of the global energy crisis, as a result of that global supply-demand
Even
gap
during
in
a
natural
mild
gas.
winter, right. Thank you. I've got limited time. Dr. Mikulska, now you described the potential impact of EU countries in effect crossing their fingers and not purchasing long-term gas contracts, hoping that they'll be able to sort of will themselves into carbon neutrality, hoping for the best, despite past performance and no sign that they're going to be able to do that. What impact could this have on Russia's ability to continue to use natural gas as a geopolitical tool for economic extortion?
Well, we do know, as many tables here have shown, that the Russian gas is still flowing to Europe, both via pipeline and as LNG, which speaks to the persistence of that fuel. While EU was able to ban oil in most of the cases, this has not been the case for Russian gas. And that creates instability that's there. Thankfully, there are ways in which LNG imports can be ramped up. However, for the next 2-3 years, those LNG imports will be limited by the supply. So there is a big problem with potential instability, volatility of prices, even if the storage that's currently at really high levels remains at high levels.
Right, this could all lead to a problem, I assume, especially, what I'd like to know is what would happen
if American LNG were no longer available to flow into foreign markets, particularly into Europe? I ask because on the domestic front, we've seen extraordinary efforts by the current administration to prevent future oil and gas exploration. What would be the effect of that if we no longer had American LNG to go into global markets?
It's almost hard to imagine, so I'm hoping that's not going to be the case, because what U.S. LNG is helping with is making that markets more commercial, depending on supply and demand, and in a way, actually reducing the volatility that could be caused by political actors. And I think that's very important. We will see potentially high prices based on shortages of supply and hikes in demand. But having those shortages based on political decisions of foreign actors that are not friendly towards us or our allies is the biggest problem. And we've seen this with Russia and the war in Ukraine. And that's something that we would like to absolutely avoid. And U.S. exports of both oil and gas have provided U.S. with geopolitical power that literally checks the power of other actors, the large producers that are often authoritarian states and that do not necessarily have the best of interest for the U.S. or its allies in mind.
Thank you. I see my time's expired. Thanks.
Senator Rono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Jørgensen, I commend the EU for its decision to reduce its dependence on Russian oil and to lend a lot more support for renewables. That's exactly what Hawaii is doing. It's going to take all of us to stop the Russians. Hawaii has made a lot of progress towards its renewable energy goal, reaching over 40% last year, but it is still the most petroleum-dependent state in the nation. And basically, Hawaii started off being 100% pretty much dependent on importation of oil from outside of our state, because we are not an oil-producing state at all. So after Russia's invasion, people in Hawaii faced high prices at the gas pump and on their energy bills. Not the only state to have that experience, but with Hawaii with increases of 10 to 20% due to the use of oil to generate electricity. Unfortunately, oil prices have come down, and the addition of new renewable projects is set to lower bills across Hawaii. Ms. Jørgensen, your testimony mentioned that the EU has, quote, ensured tailored support for vulnerable households and businesses to withstand high and volatile energy prices, end quote. What are the policies that you think have been helpful to people in Europe?
Thank you, Senator. Indeed, households and businesses across the European Union were faced with extremely high energy prices during this crisis over the last year, since the war and before the war, as Russia was starting to weaponize energy.
Yes.
And bring up prices. We've put in place a series of measures. First of all, given flexibility, given room for member states to support some of their industries with the very, very high energy prices. We have created fiscal space to compensate consumers, both households and businesses, through a revenue cap and electricity generation and through a solidarity contribution. So we have created instruments at European level, common European instruments, that gives room for member states to provide the compensation and help households. One of the issues we're seeing in this energy crisis is we, of course, need to maintain the incentives for demand reduction. Continued demand reduction is necessary for the European Union to remain energy secure. We need to act both on the demand and on the supply side. And so in order to do that, we have sought to design the measures in a way that did not take away the energy-saving incentives that high prices do constitute.
So what role do you see for the additions of renewable energy in the European Union for reducing the level and volatility of energy prices in the future?
We see a significant role for renewable energy in that context, again, both for our security of supply, for our resilience, and for our climate targets, our climate goals. We have already last year accelerated significantly the build-out of renewables in the European Union. A significant amount of gigawatt was added. What we did to achieve that was both to facilitate our permitting rules, to accelerate permitting, because there's typically some delay in the procedures for renewables. And in addition to that, we have made investment and funding available at European level to go into renewable energy. We will continue with that over the coming years so as to achieve the targets we have set ourselves for the renewable share.
What are your targets in terms of reliance on renewables? Do you have a percentage target? Because Hawaii is seeking to be 100% renewable for electricity by 2045. What are the EU's targets, percentage?
We aim to have a 45% share of renewables in our energy mix by 2030. That's a proposal from the European Commission that's currently under discussion with our co-legislators.
My best to you in achieving those targets.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. And now we have a returning member who just can't stay away of this electric type of a commission and committee we have and the vibrant hearings that we hold. So we're happy to have you back, Senator.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, thank you for allowing me to be able to slip back in as well. So the witnesses, thank you for your ongoing work on this. I do have just a couple of questions dealing with LNG specifically and how we're getting natural gas to Europe and some of the gaps that are there. If I can talk through, Dr. Light, let me start on the permitting process for the export terminals. Obviously, we have additional export terminals that are coming online, trying to increase additional capacity. What's our timeline to be able to increase our capacity for exporting LNG to Europe and those allies that are really interested in getting replacement gas at this point? How long will it take to increase that?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I need to know what particular permit you're talking
Yeah,
about.
I'm not looking for a specific one. I'm just talking, because there's no specific company I'm trying to pursue to say, can theirs go faster? I'm just trying to figure out how fast can we ramp up, because this is not an instantaneous thing to say, well, let's just send more natural gas to be able to substitute. We have natural gas, but it's the infrastructure to actually get it out and the terminals themselves to be able to permit, obviously to make the decision, is it in our national interest? Right. And I think that'd be my first question. Is it in America's national interest for our allies to get more access to American gas?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, so then how quickly could we ramp up over the next couple of years to increase capacity going to Europe?
So the department is involved in a number of internal conversations to try to streamline the process, to try to look at what's in the pipeline in terms of applications and make sure that those move forward expeditiously. There's another problem that we're facing, which is that we have permitted much more capacity than we're actually currently seeing, that we're going to have about 20 billion cubic feet per day permitted by the end of this decade. We have 29 that's already been permitted, but there's not movement to construct, right, based on those permits yet. And so that's an additional problem where we don't actually have to wait on the permitting process. It's really, how do you make sure that you don't create this interminable gap and ledge where companies are not moving forward on permits that they already have, and that's something that we're looking at as well.
So is the focus on getting permits to say, we'll get you a permit to be able to do this if you're actually going to do it? What's the emphasis?
That's part of the calculus there, and we'd be happy to work with your staff. It's my colleague Brad Crabtree, who runs the Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management, who's at the front line of that, but I've been in constant conversations with him every day about this.
Well, part of the issue for them is they're always looking for long-term contracts to say, okay, if we actually spend the billions of dollars to be able to create this, are we going to be able to get the long-term contracts to be able to actually do it? That'll actually pay for it, obviously, to be able to recoup that cost on it. Is that what seems to be holding some of the companies back, is just the long-term contracting portion of it?
I think there's a concern there, and that's one of the reasons that President Biden and President van der Leyen created this U.S.-EU gas task force last March to try to actually drill down into that as one of the key things in order to create investment confidence into the future.
Okay, we've had sections of the Northeast United States that have actually been purchasers of Russian gas, which has always been the most ironic thing to me, that the United States is a purchaser long-term of Russian gas, because we don't have the pipeline capacity to be able to get we have American gas not very far away from it, we just don't have the pipeline capability to actually get there. Where is that gas coming from now that's coming into the northern part of the United States? Because we're not buying it from Russia anymore. We're getting it from where?
So this is sort of outside of my lane, but I don't know the answer to you. I'll make sure I get it to you. I believe some of that is coming up from the Gulf and getting redirected, but I don't want to swear to that here. I think that You know, one of the important things here as we move forward on this as well is to make sure that we've got the cleanest, most competitive gas supply system in the world. Russia did not have that.
Right.
It was not a transition fuel that they were selling to Europe and the rest of the world. The United States wants that to be a secure, decarbonized supply. That's something you and I have talked about before, and I really see that as the future there. But I'll absolutely get you an answer back.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And that is one of the issues for me is we produce energy in our exploration cleaner than anyone else in the world in the way that we do it, actually going to pursue the natural gas. And so for me, there's an incentive to say if we're going to do this as clean as possible, because we're going to need natural gas for decades and decades still in the future as we're transitioning to whatever that other fuel source will be in the day to be able to substitute for that consistent power source that natural gas is. We need to make sure it's coming from the cleanest possible production and exploration that we possibly can.
That's right. And I also think investment in abatement technologies as well. I mean, this is the way that we're going to make the world secure and decarbonize and solve all the problems together with respect to energy security, diversity of supply, and attending to our climate goals as well.
Okay, I appreciate that. I know I don't have a lot of time to be able to do this. Mr. Chairman, thank you for allowing me to be able to jump and ask a question, because this is a big issue, just a steady supply. We've obviously got a lot of natural gas companies here that are producing, that are hoping that they're actually helping support global peace, quite frankly, and not only American stability of our energy prices, but also the occasion.
Pipelines to move them, right?
We have to have the pipelines to move in. We have to have the export terminals to be able to get it there. They've got to be able to regasify on the other side as well. But there's also the contracting portion.
Well, Senator, you're always welcome to come back anytime you want.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. Let me just finish up real quick. Dr. Light, if you want to talk about the IRA and the effect it's having, and basically, my problem, as you know, is that bill was designed to be energy secure. It's a balanced approach, and I think a lot of people have been misled because, and honestly, the administration has sold it as an environmental bill only, or they use that more to their base, and I've been very engaged with them trying to change and be accurate. But as you see that bill, basically for a 10-year period, the bill is designed to have the United States of America totally energy independent. That means we'll produce more fossil, but we do it cleaner than anywhere in the world. So as we replace to our friends around the world, they're getting the cleanest extraction of gas and oil and coal even than any place else. And that helps the climate tremendously from relying on the dirtier areas of the world that produce and not with the environmental oversight, such as methane capturing, carbon capture utilization, things of that sort. So if you can just speak briefly on that, and I'm having a problem with the permitting too. We are slow on permitting, you know that, and we've got to speed that up in order to do the job. I don't know if you all understand that basically all the people who want more renewables, we tied the two together. Remember, there's not going to be any big movement on more wind out on the Gulf unless we're extracting gas and oil from the Gulf. There's not going to be large projects as far as solar projects on BLM land unless we're extracting the critical minerals that we need and other resources that we have. I don't know if they're really realizing they're inextricably connected. Can't do one without the other. That gives us a balanced approach. So no matter all of us have reasons to want to decarbonize and be environmentally friendly and understand our responsibility. On the other hand, the risk that we take and the dependency that we have and our allies have on what abundance that we have that we can produce for at least the next decade depends on us being accurate with that. So if you have any insight on that whatsoever, any comments. And then, Director, I'm going to go to you, Director Jørgensen, to see your European comments on the IRA, which I know, with all of your friends sitting behind you, is going to be quite lively.
Thanks very much, Senator Manchin, and for your leadership in creating this astounding revolution, frankly, in energy legislation, the likes of which I don't think we've seen in the world before. This is our all-of-the-above energy strategy. Right. It is the only way we're going to see a real transition to net zero emissions in the world, in the energy sector, which is going to actually provide security of supply and will not increase prices, which will not hurt consumers. We've got all across the board, all the chips are covered, from renewables to nuclear, advanced nuclear, to abated carbon energy.
I will say one thing, if I may interrupt you 1 second. The whole reason we call it the Inflation Reduction Act, if we put more product in the market, pure economics, so you put more product in the market, you have better pricing. So you're helping the consumer. That was the reason for what we have done. And
exactly right. And it also attends to those over-the-horizon technologies, clean hydrogen, everything else. I have to say, sir, that you have created, it's not only here in the United States where we have this vision and now the resources to do that and seriously move forward on it. Unstalling conversations about carbon capture and sequestration, making that a reality, finally, is that it's inspired the world. I was in Bangalore, India last week for the G20 negotiations. I got to tell you that India is ready to move forward on green hydrogen, on carbon capture and sequestration in a way that they can scale up in a way that's amazing. If you look at over 1 billion people then, you know, in a energy system that's using that, as well as now they want to talk with us about SMRs. So that is coming from the capacity that's been created by this legislation. If you can see the United States partnering with countries like that, countries in Europe, you know, other countries around the world, that is where we are seeing an investment in new energy technology as important as the investment, frankly, in military technology that we have before, because it will really give these countries true independence and true security of supply.
I appreciate it. I know you're hearing a good bit as you go around too, and we've been hearing it. And now to hear from our dear friend, Ditte Jørgensen, on your perspective of this. And I've heard from your colleagues, and we hear you loud and clear. So tell me how it's working, or not working, or challenging.
Thank you very much, Senator, for that opportunity. So the Inflation Reduction Act, there are two perspectives that I would like to draw out. Now, the first one is that it is welcome that the United States is investing in green technologies and clean technologies, investing in climate change. That is good in terms of technological developments, innovation. It can help lower costs. So that is a welcome overall direction that is closely aligned with what we're doing in the European Union. We welcome that partnership and look forward to continuing that partnership. And our President, Ursula von der Leyen, has very clearly welcomed that direction of the Inflation Reduction Act. At the same time, we are deeply concerned with some of the elements of the Inflation Reduction Act that are clearly discriminatory. There are domestic content requirements. There are requirements that will make it more difficult for Europe to attract investments, more difficult for Europe to go through, more difficult for Europe to stay competitive. If I put that into the wider context of the global energy crisis we're in and the current geopolitics, we are each other's most important trading partners. We are each other's most important investment partners. So we have an interest in both of our markets continuing to develop, to remain competitive, because that can help innovation, that can help energy security, that can help create the technologies that are necessary for the future. So I think our take on that is we need to work together to solve those concerns, and we welcome the engagement we have seen from the US on this. We need to continue that work to find solutions to the outstanding concerns and to the discriminatory elements of the Inflation Reduction Act, so that Europe can also remain competitive and our partnership can remain a fair and open one.
Well, let me give you a little bit of insight how this all came about. It came about because we were not able to help our allies with the Ukraine war, what it created in EU, and that was the purpose of having energy security here. I couldn't get this administration to move in that direction because they were moving more towards just everything on the renewable end of it. That's fine, and that's aspirational, but it's basically not reality. It's not what we needed. We needed hard fossil in order to replace, but we can do it cleaner and better. So we put more for carbon capture utilization. We went from $55 to $80. We went from $30 to $50 on utilization and sequestering. We went to 80. 50, was it 50 or 55? Huh? We went to 60. Went to $60 on utilization. So we really upped the ante to find the new technologies that we can, and that was the whole thing. We're just trying to mature the industry and all these new technologies. The difference what we used, I'd always been criticized. I've had a lot of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, especially on my side of the aisle, criticize me for not adapting to cap and trade or carbon pricing. And the reason I didn't do that, and the reason I thought it was wrong, because once that pricing gets absorbed into the market, there's no resources going to find the cure or find a new technology. So we incentivized it with the money we put towards this, that it'll mature it quicker, that we can share with you all and the rest of the world that wants to get less carbon, but be able to be realistic and meet the needs of your energy. We did that. The other thing is you all had a concern, and rightfully so, and I've heard you all loud and clear, concerning on basically when we said we're going to secure our critical minerals from North America or from free trading governments with countries with free trade agreements. We need to expand that to our NATO allies. We understand that. I'm trying to work through that. We're trying to get a score on that to find out what it does. So basically, so we have a reliable source, all of us do in the free world, have a reliable source of these critical minerals that can't be held captive, which we are right now by China mostly. But really Russia, China, whether it be Iran, whether it be North Korea, countries that have nothing in common with our way of life and our desire to governance and democracy and freedom. So those are the things we're concerned about. We can work through that. I think what we're going to see is I think Europe is going to move more in a competitive mode as far as, you know, competing, and that's what it's all about. That's what we've been so great at, all of us have been. And the things that we have done together, it's amazing since World War II. We can continue to go into the 21st century and on into the 22nd century if we do it together, and we understand that. The allies, the value of the free world is based on allies and relationships. It's not based on one superpower. We know we can't do it without you, and we know that. And we're going to have to make sure that we all go this together, if you will. So I would hope you'll look at what we have done, not in retrospect of is it harming, or was it intended to harm, especially our allies, our dearest allies. But it was basically to jumpstart the technology that's going to be needed to take us into the future. But you're still going to have, you know, even the president said for 10 years, but I think longer than that, we're going to be depending on fossils. So can we extract and utilize natural gas and capture all of our methane so there's no vetting and no harm to the environment? Can we basically be able to develop hydrogen, which is the technology has been around forever, and now be able to do it and do it cleaner than even blue hydrogen? We got pink hydrogen, we got green hydrogen, we can do it all. And every part of the world can benefit from this technology. And then we have small modular reactors with molten salt cooling, and basically you can take those up and down like a peaking plant. That's all coming on strong. We're going to with the amount of money, because if not, they've got a 10-year window. They've never had a 10-year window in any government from the standpoint of giving you 10 years of certainty that you have this pool of money to work out of, because it's always been a couple years and then another administration or another philosophical ideology comes into play with a new administration and things change. This one's locked in and funding secured from the 15% minimum tax that we have on our largest corporations. So we think it was a win-win, but we want to share that, truly. I don't want anyone to think. And when you see something that's being hindering or that you think it's been an obstacle, just let us know, because I think you brought to my attention. I appreciate very much. And we are working now. We've been working with the Secretary of Janet Yellen and of Treasury to make sure that we're able to apply this properly. So hopefully you know that we value your friendship, your relationship, and most importantly, the allyship that we've had, that the free world has basically profited by what we've been able to do for the last 60, 70 years. We intend to do it for a lot longer. So I want to thank all of you for joining us. Dr. Mikulska, thank you for making an effort to be here. And Dr. Light, as always, we appreciate having you. And we're working with you on a piece of legislation that's going to give you the ability to do more of what you can do and what you need to do to help us be stronger with all our allies and our friends around the world. And again, Director General Jørgensen, thank you so much for the effort that you made to be here and how much you've added to this hearing. I appreciate very much. Members will have until the close of business tomorrow to submit any additional questions for the record, and the committee stands adjourned.